Welcome to today's session, everyone.
We are PreMed CC, a student-led organization established in the fall of 2021.
Our goal as an organization was to create an online program for pre-medical students at community colleges and universities, with the hope of guiding the next generation of diverse and inclusive physicians.
And while we advertise our organization as being for community college students, our events are open to anyone.
We realize that finding guidance and mentorship in a pre-med journey can be especially challenging for first-generation pre-med students,
people that lack the financial resources, or just those who do not know people in the medical field.
One of the best parts about our events is that they are virtual, so you can do it from the comfort of your own home.
We typically have events on Fridays from 5 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 12:30 Pacific Standard Time.
If you aren't able to attend the event, all of our sessions are uploaded on our YouTube channel.
Many of our sessions will end up with a Q&A with the speakers.
Any questions that you have, you may put it in the Q&A session on Zoom, and our team members will read them and have them answer.
After you have attended our event, you can log into our website and complete the quiz, which will contain questions pertaining to our session today.
If you score 70% or higher on the quiz, you will be awarded a certificate to show that you attended our session today.
If you want to stay connected with the upcoming events or just want to tell your pre-med friends about the PreMed CC, you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as @PreMedCC.
Alrighty, well, welcome everyone. We're honored to have everyone join us today. We have Miss Bullard who's going to get us started, and then we will get started. And during the sessions, if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A. And we only ask that you just do it once and not repost the same question because it will delay us being able to ask them. So we will try to get as many questions answered as possible. So, alrighty.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dina Bullard, and I'm the Senior Director of Health Sciences and Workforce Innovation in the UC Health Division within the Office of the President. And for those of you who don't know, the Office of the President is a system-wide office or our headquarters office for all 10 UC campuses. In fact, for the first time in history, or in UC's history, I should say, the president is actually a physician who also used to be an associate dean of admissions at UCSF. So as part of my role, I get to work with some really incredible leaders, and they're, they represent all of our health professional schools across the UC system, including the admissions deans for all of our 6 schools of medicine. And today we have all UC schools represented and here with you to share some key strategies for preparing and applying to medical school and to answer your questions this evening. I will serve as the moderator for this conversation and would like to start by introducing our esteemed panel. So joining us today, and if you guys could just wave, on the screen so they can see you and know who you are. We have Dr. Jennifer Lucero, Associate Dean of Admissions at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Dr. Mark Henderson, Associate Dean of Admissions at UC Davis. Next, we have Dr. Kama Galuma, Associate Dean of Admissions and Student Affairs at UC San Diego. Dr. Cristobal Barrios, Assistant Dean of Admissions at the UCI School of Medicine. We also have Helen Chung, Director of Admissions at UCSF. And last but not least, we have Dr. Daniel Teraguchi, Associate Dean of Admissions at UCR. Can you move to the next slide? And really, we can't thank them enough for taking time out of their extremely busy schedules on a Friday night to be with us. Next slide, please. So the plan for the discussion today is to start off by really focusing on how to prepare for the selection process for admission to medical school. We will be discussing the components of the primary application, which is the foundation for the process, along with tips for what makes for a strong applicant. We will also talk about some of the enrichment programs available on our campuses that provide support along the pathway to becoming a medical student. But we will save the best for last, opening up the conversation with you, the audience, to respond to your questions. Next slide. To get us going, I want to start by just providing a quick overview of our University of California Health Sciences education system by saying that we are one of the nation's largest health sciences instructional programs with 20 health professional schools and 6 academic health centers throughout the state of California. Next slide. So as you can see, we don't only train physicians at UC, but we also train dentists, nurses, optometrists, pharmacists, public health professionals, veterinarians, researchers, and many other types of health workers. But training doctors make up the largest share of trainees in the health sciences across UC. Next slide. I also want to mention that one of our highest priorities include training a health workforce that reflects the diversity of California, who are prepared to provide healthcare that is centered around health equity, inclusion, and justice. We are proud to say that the majority of UC medical schools are nationally recognized for diversity. Next slide. In fact, this year, 50% of the entering class identify as being from a group underrepresented in medicine, which is very different than what it was 20 years ago. So we are definitely making progress in this space. And so we are certainly hoping that many of you will see yourselves being among our diverse student body one day. So now I want to turn to our panelists to share their tips on how to navigate getting here. And my first question, next slide, please. My first question is for Dr. Teraguchi. Can you describe holistic review and the role that it plays in your selection process?
Sure. So just for folks to know that holistic reviews are really an opportunity to tell your story, right? So the entire application tells your journey. And a lot of times students say, well, how do I get into your medical school? And I always say you're doing it backward, right? You're not going back from the medical school to what you're doing. It's really what you're pursuing, what you're passionate about, and all the components that your journey is taking. And so we've used something called holistic review to begin looking at that story. So many of you know, I'm sure of all of you know about the MCAT and your metrics, right? That's only one piece of the story. And what holistic review does is make sure that one aspect doesn't really define your story in one particular way. It really doesn't pigeonhole you into one particular aspect. It really provides a holistic piece. And so your metrics are just one aspect of that. And the other part are your experiences. These are things that you're interested in and that you're passionate about, that you evolve. And it can range from a lot of different experiences, from just exploring, you've dabbled in different things, to be able to explore that. But over, sometimes it's a long-term commitment, what that looks like. And the application really is an opportunity for you to explain why those are of interest to you and how they've had impacts to you as well. And part of the MCAS, you may know, is they've added a new section called Impactful Experience. You can talk about how the experience, you've grown from it, how it's defined values for you. So again, it's part of that overall story that you are developing for us in our medical schools to determine, if you're a good fit for our school. And then your attributes. These are things that come about, things like characteristics, you're compassionate, and what does that look like, and your values. And oftentimes those come from your families, your upbringing, all those kind of experiences. And we take those together to look at for fit. And for UCR School of Medicine, our goal really is to increase the number of physicians serving and caring for the inland Southern California, right? So we want to look at the underserved communities. What are those experiences? How are you going to contribute to those different areas? And my colleagues as well look at the full story and alignment of what they're looking for. So think about the metrics, your academics, and sometimes even your academics tell a story. Even in my own journey, struggling at 18-year-old, being on my own, and didn't always focus on academics, but I gained my momentum as I went along. So really those can tell a story as well. So looking at the metrics, experience, the attributes holistically, and really telling your story to the medical school. And feel free, my other colleagues, to chime in if they'd like.
Great. Well, speaking of the MCAT, how do you weigh MCAT scores and GPAs in your admissions process? And what other factors are considered? And as you respond, if you could touch on some of the common myths around minimum GPA and score requirements that you think people should know the truth about.
Sure. Where we look at is really readiness for med school, and GPA and MCAT play into different factors, right? So we often look at applicants. If you have a lower GPA, we look at a higher MCAT because the MCAT can sort of compensate for that, and vice versa, right? We look at, if you did well in medical or in undergrad, looking at your scores and comparing to the MCAT. So that's the holistic picture of what that looks like. Grade trends become an important part of it. And many times students, even in community colleges, as you've gone to different stages, it could be you struggled earlier on. And so we look at your science GPA and what that might be. So you may have struggled as an undergraduate, say you got a 2.8, but you did a post-bacc and a graduate program. So looking at those and see where you found your kind of rhythm in academics, where those play. And so it's not one complete answer where it fits. It's just a measure of where it might be for readiness. And at UCSD School of Medicine, we look at the whole picture and understand, we have students who may be working full-time. What does that look like in terms of their experience and accessibility to resources? First generation, you oftentimes don't know how to navigate resources at the school, or you may have to work full-time, and really taking those those are and MCAT scores over time. So we don't pinpoint, like there's not a threshold particularly, but we really look at academic readiness through many different lenses, including the MCAT and GPA, graduate work. And I think really important are the recommendation letters. If a student has struggled academically, we want to see a faculty member who's taught them say, yes, while the student may have struggled, they came to office hours, they worked hard to get there. And that B is really strong. They're ready for med school. They've done all the right behavior. So like I said, the holistic review, the grade does not tell the single story, right? It's about the journey. And we want that readiness. We want students to know that asking for help is a strength, right? Engaging their classmates and doing that. So that's where the MCAT, how we look at it as a whole story, not as a single component within the application process.
Great, thank you. Any other panelists want to say anything about that before we move on?
Yeah, in particular to the MCAT, I just wanted to address a myth and a pet peeve of mine. The myth is, or the problem is, people who say, oh, if it's on your application that you took the MCAT more than once, that's almost like a death sentence. And it's not. We do realize that some people use the first one as a test pilot, or as it was already mentioned, you're working, you don't have time, you don't have tutors, and you have to take it 2 or 3 times before you get the swing of it. Now, is that ideal? No, but is it an automatic? You're going to get bumped from the roster. Also, no. And then the other thing that's kind of a pet peeve of mine is I see people that get 513, 517, 520, and they take it again because they didn't get in. And I can almost guarantee you, if you got into that 5 teens range and you didn't get in, it's probably something else on your application and not your MCAT. I don't throw out too many specific numbers, although I just kind of sort of did, but anyways, that's a myth, and that's a pet peeve of mine, is to watch people take the MCAT over and over, even though they already got a good score.
Thank you.
I'd like to add too that in the past 20 years, even 30 years, the MCAT has gone from a metric of worth, meaning how high do you get, and you see still older faculty members still processing that way. Not admissions committees, but I mean older faculty members. Oh, that person got 522. That must be a good student, a good medical student. It's gone from a metric of worth to a metric of risk. So I think all the other admissions deans on this call would agree with me when I say we're not so much looking for 513. We need to see higher, and it'll make you a better applicant. We're just looking where you reach an inflection point, where in the MCAT does say you may have issues with progressing through the first and the second year. And you don't start to see that inflection point in an MCAT score until it gets around 505. Not to throw numbers out too. I'm like Dr. Barrios, I hate throwing numbers out, but unless you get to that 505, 503 range, when the inflection point starts to dip down in terms of progression from your first and second year, from your second year to third year, and then we start to look at it as, is this person at risk? But even then, again, as Dr. Taraguchi said, we look holistically. What was going on? What does the GPA tell us? What were you doing all this time? Who are you? To really get a full picture of that applicant.
Thank you all for that insight. Now, can we move to the next slide? So there's a lot on this slide, but I want to turn to Hallen to ask you, what courses do pre-med students need to take in order to be admitted to medical school? And do they need to major in science?
Sure, thanks so much. So there is a lot on this slide. I did that to illustrate sort of two things. One, even though all 6 of us are here and we're all part of the same University of California system, as you can see, our prerequisites are different. UCLA is competency-based, UC San Diego has recommendations, and the rest of us are sort of anywhere from 1 year to some semesters or a certain amount of quarters. Some of us require a mix of chemistry and organic chemistry. Some require biochemistry, some don't require biochemistry. There's math, there isn't math. And this is really just to illustrate a couple things. One, you should always do your research and you should take a look at the schools where you're planning on applying and make sure that you have met the prerequisites at those institutions. A fairly safe bet is to think about taking some amount of biology, chemistry, OChem, maybe physics, biochemistry, and then think about maybe adding a humanities class in there as well, particularly if you have an interest in that. Now, having said that, I think it is a myth that a lot of pre-meds believe they need to major in biology or a bio or a science, and that's not true. You should major in anything that you like as long as you are taking the prerequisite courses, that's fine. Again, just do your research, make sure that you're actually meeting the prerequisites at a majority of the schools where you're planning on applying, just to make sure that you have met them and that's not going to be a reason why you don't get a secondary invitation or you don't get an interview invitation. I will also just add that taking coursework at the community college level is perfectly acceptable and it's great. A lot of our applicants do it. We definitely realize at the medical schools that access to resources is very different, and sometimes taking courses at a community college is the best route for a lot of our applicants, and that's great. As long as it is an accredited institution, we have no issue with where you take those courses.
Thank you, Helen, for clarifying that. I know back when I was pre-med many moons ago, the thinking was that community college courses wouldn't be considered rigorous enough to prepare for medical school. And so I'm really happy to hear you clarify that that's not necessarily the viewpoint today. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to say anything about coursework or course load or anything like that? All right, well, let's move to the next slide, please. So as mentioned before, grades and MCAT scores are not the only thing that matters in the selection process. Dr. Barrios, in your view, what other kind of activities should students be engaged in that would prepare them for medical school and help make them stand out?
Yeah, I put on there what, where, and why, and then the why, because I get that a lot. And I get the, why are you making me go through these hoops? And I am not making you go through these hoops, and we are not making you go through these hoops. What we are trying to do is to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And in terms of the clinical exposure, what we look for is actual hands-on dealing with patients in one way or another. I know the really popular things right now are scribing or MA or work in an office or actual EMT work and not just the training. Because we want you to have, or we want to be able to see that you explored this idea that you have in your head that you want to be in the medical field and in particular a physician. And in terms of research, I had so many questions related to this, which is, does it matter if it's basic science? Does it have to be clinical? And it doesn't really. And I almost kind of jokingly say, I don't care if it's underwater basket weaving and whether you're trying to figure out whether left-handed pattern is better than a right-handed pattern. But what we are looking for from you is to see that you have some experience and know what the basic fundamentals of research are, creating a question, looking at the background of the question, gathering all the data, analyzing the data. I mean, that it could be anything as long as you're doing those steps that go along and doing research. And then the community service, I don't care what people say. Medicine is still a sacrificed field. We sacrifice a lot of time and energy and sometimes family dynamics and hours. And so we want to see that you're able to think outside of yourself and give a little bit of yourself. And so that kind of very glosses over why we make you do some of these things. Now, the what and the where is really kind of applies to all three. We look for patterns of consistency and commitment. I would rather you have a long-term commitment to a couple of projects and not a bunch of small projects. I work 3 months in somebody's lab, then 3 months in somebody else's lab, then 3 months in somebody else's lab. And that's just showing me that you're kind of checking off boxes. And the same thing with community service. I tell people it's the pattern of, did you commit to it for a long time? And was it consistent with your story going back to, the holistic approach? Were the activities that you did in community service, consistent with you, or did you do the, bunch of summers doing hospice or Camp Kesem or, the free clinic but you just did a little smatterings of it here and there? I would rather, again, you do one long-term that's consistent with you. And I give an example often when I'm saying these things I read a statement in her applicants community service was that they taught, autistic children how to ride horses. And in their statement, the reason they did that as the community service is because they had 2 siblings that had autism. And so it was consistent with their story. And that's the point I make when you're trying to pick and choose what you need to be doing and how long you need to be doing it, because those are the kind of questions I get all the time.
Great. To follow on that, is shadowing considered clinical exposure?
I don't know about everybody else, but where I am and me in particular, I look at it as kind of the B side of the menu. It's kind of like the vegetables that you have to order with the main entree. It's like, it's okay if you did it, but if that's all you're doing, it's not going to get you there.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Can we have the next slide, please? So one of the ways that schools learn more about an applicant's attributes, like Dr. Teraguchi said earlier, is through letters of recommendation. Dr. Galuma, who should they be asking to write these letters?
Oh, that is a great question. And I think I'll preface by saying that letters move the needle. Letters remember Dr. Teraguchi told us about the students who didn't have the best grades, but then they had really great letters. Letters move the needle. Why do they do that? Because at the time that someone's looking at your application, they can see your grades, but they really want to find out who you are, what your strengths are, and so on and so forth. And so the letter should be from anybody who you felt you had a substantive, informative interaction with. Now, one myth that's out there that it has to be only from research mentors, or that it can't be from a coach. And I would say all those myths are wrong, right? I would say 2 things about letters. If you had a substantive interaction with a clinician, it's good to try and get a letter from that clinician, because now people are paying attention. Oh, wow, this person worked closely with a doctor. They were scribing from them, and they put it as a meaningful experience. So if you interacted with a clinician, a physician, you should try and get a letter from that. In addition, if you listed certain activities as most meaningful to you, you should probably get at least 1 or 2, if not all your letters of those meaningful activities covered. Because again, if you have a meaningful interaction with someone, it'll be that way. Now, who? It can be anybody. I have personally seen, I'm sure that my colleagues have too. I've seen amazing letters that got people admitted from their varsity coach or their employer. In addition, you have them from professors and clinical mentors as well. The other thing I want to mention that may be a myth I hear that being propagated in pre-health advising from colleges is that when you think about a professor, You want to get a letter from the person you got the A in the class. I would say no, it's really about who you feel had a meaningful interaction. Maybe I'll go to the next slide to expound on some of this.
As he's moving that slide, Dr. Galuma, is there a minimum or maximum for the number of letters that that are recommended be included?
Oh, that's where your point about making sure you understand the requirements, and I think Dr. Hallen said as well for the course, understand the requirements of the school you're applying to. The more letters you have, the better, but at some point they're not going to help you too much, and the fewer, the worse, as you can imagine. So I've seen some files when 2 popped in, you probably want to have more than that, but just look at the requirements of the school you're applying to.
Great, great. And so I see we've moved on to the next slide, and really what we want to know is, you know, in thinking about what you would consider a strong letter, can you also share some of the do's and don'ts associated with letters of recommendation?
Yes, so the do is very easy, right? You know, good letters will describe how you did, basically just to really cut the chase, as you see there, how you did in your class, your project, even on your team or at your job. The better letters go past that. They get to know you, and they bring out your drive to help others, your drive to overcome barriers you faced. I've seen amazing letters about someone's passion, compassion, your ethics, your character, how you treat others, how you stand out from others in a good way, and now those letters move the needle. I remember once I saw a letter of this letter writer took photos. So this particular applicant loved to bake, and she'd bring in baked goods to her classes and had all this attention to detail. This letter writer was just effusive, and they took pictures of this applicant's baking, put in the letter. Just the effort it took to write that letter told volumes about the passion that letter writer had for this one applicant. I haven't quite seen, I've seen other letters that are somewhat similar, but not quite where they showed your baked goods photographed and inserted in the letter. Now the don'ts, I will go to the next slide where I'll outline some of the don'ts that we see. You know, nothing's absolute, right? So maybe the first don't is don't, if you have a friend who's a physician, a friend of the family, and they've known you since you're in diapers, and maybe they really want to help you, I'll write a letter for you. Don't worry, I'm a doctor. They'll take a letter from me with gold. I would try and avoid doing that. It tells a lot to the admissions committee. One, we know that letter is conflicted to begin with. And then, frankly, I've heard some committee members and that comes up repeatedly, question your judgment and why you chose that letter with a clear conflict of interest, and someone who hasn't seen you in a more mature framework, working with you in a lab or at the bedside, commenting on who you are. Maybe I'll talk about the next one. So a next letter we sometimes see from people is from a high stature person who hardly knows you. We see that a lot. Now, a lot of the underpinnings of this is forming connections with mentors. So as you go forth from community college into other universities, or even staying at SDSU or Cal State or wherever university you may transfer to in your path to applying, or even when in your work, you want to form meaningful relationships with people who can tell people who you are. So a typical letter we might get is from someone who went to the PI of a lab, even though that PI hardly interacted with them, and asked them for a letter, maybe showed up for an hour, office hours, to tell them who they are, give them their CV, and hope for the best. We can see that a lot in a letter. So invest in relationships that, or ask someone who has a relationship with you to write a letter. Another thing, maybe go to the next one, is when it comes from getting letters from professors. And I've seen this in the pre-health advising things. Hey, you want to get a letter from the person who got an A, you got an A from. I would say, as you're going with the professor looks you in the eye and smiles and they're happy to see you walk in the room, or you've had a meaningful interaction with, even if you got a B+ in the class, or B, you know, if they're like all talking about you and really into what you're doing, and you have fabulous discussions with them, even though you didn't really score that highly on exams, some of them are standardized tests, you might want to think about that person. we can see the A you got. And if you go with someone who doesn't really know you that well, who you're thinking you're getting a letter based on your A, you get a letter like the example I put here, a lot of filler. And these are professors, they love to help students, and they have their template letters. In my class, we do A, B, and C, then I have students do X, Y, and Z, and Juan or Mary or Christine did really well in my class, and they fill in your name there because they really want to help you. If you ask them for a letter, they don't want to fall short for you. We can tell those letters are not hurting you, but they're definitely not helping you. And lastly, you want to think about the field you're going into. So get a letter from someone who understands what med school is looking for. Remember I told you can get them from professors? I've seen amazing letters from theater professors and creative writing professors. But whenever you do something like that, or from lab PIs, mentors, you want to make sure they understand what medicine's about. Because if they don't, what will happen is that letter will come out too focused, and they'll literally write about their little detail, their little world, and won't help you. It won't hurt you, but it will not help you. Now, how do you identify someone who maybe is not a clinician, maybe they're a research scientist or a creative writing professor? How can you identify someone who might write a letter? Well, typically, you'll know in how they express themselves, meaning if they can apply what they're passionate about, what they have expertise in, to a larger construct of the world. For example, I once did research with a spinal cord researcher and who got very specific about stuff, but he could articulate how his research was going to affect people with spinal cord injuries and how it would affect their lives in all aspects. He got it, the more expansive view of things. So you want to have people, no matter what they are, it could be your coach, your dance professor, otherwise, who really understands you. But if they get what medicine's about, at least in that holistic sense, that's where you want to go.
That is some great advice, Dr. Galuma. Anybody else want to say anything about letters?
Yeah, let me jump in here. I agree with a lot of that. I think this relates a little bit to what Dr. Badrio said earlier about work ethic and dedication. I think who you choose to get a letter from, really, I think it could be any number of individuals, but the bottom line is the better they know you, that's the better the letter is going to be. That is what can they say about what your work ethic is like, how dedicated you are, just what kind of what they've seen over time. Ideally, again, this dates back to the activities we talked about earlier, or experiences that might be helpful. Could be a work, it could be, I think this was mentioned, a supervisor at a job. Really, again, I don't think there's a prohibition on who can write a letter. It's just, do they know medicine's hard? It takes a lot of perseverance, takes a lot of, long-term commitment. So those are the kind of qualities that, I think we all look for in a letter. So don't pick someone who isn't going to be able to comment on those types of things about you.
Yes, and one of the most important things is form relationships. Form relationships with mentors, reach out, get out there, and again, your experiences too. If you have an in-depth, as Dr. Barrio said, in-depth experience where over time someone can see you grow and get to know you, that will be one of the more impassioned letters you can get.
Yeah, I completely agree with all of those statements. And can I just add one more thing, which is, and it goes along with how well that person knows you and the meaningfulness of your experience. Gauge your target. So if you go to somebody and you ask them, hey, I'm considering writing me a letter of recommendation for med school, and they respond very enthusiastically or say, I'd be honored, I'd love to, absolutely, then that's somebody that's probably going to write you a good letter. Don't, or kind of forget to send the materials and don't get the letter of recommendation from somebody goes, oh, okay. Because there's almost nothing worse than, as was already mentioned, a mediocre letter about someone that barely knows you, as opposed to somebody who's going to write you a great letter.
Very helpful insight here. Thank you. One last question about letters. How do medical schools view pre-med committee letters?
Well, we actually pay attention to those. They tend to have I'll tell you the truth, pre-med committee letters tend to have a more structured review process. It also depends on how honest they are. So there's some that's, here's our spread of how we put our recommendations to students. In other words, we like we like a methodology to things. And you see this in the post-medical school world too, when the letters are going to these standard letters of evaluation, where they're not just glowing, they're giving an honest assessment. So some of these can be letters of evaluation, which pack a punch, as opposed to letters of recommendation. So a lot of us really value letters of evaluation where they're being honest, put things in context, you can read it, it's not overly hyped. So it depends on how that pre-med committee puts together their methodology, how they frame the letter. But committee letters are pretty helpful. But they're a different type of letter than that impassioned person really knows you. A committee will never really get to know who you are. They haven't spent 2 years at the bedside with you. So it's a very different type of letter. I don't know if others have something to say too, but those are my views.
I was going to add something because I think there's a couple different, the way that the letters are, the committee letters are put in there. There's 2 types. I mean, they may be listed as committee letter, but there's that curated committee letter, which I think Dr. Gulama was talking about, where it's, there's information from a committee that meets and reviews, relative to that individual, relative to the group that is applying, to medical school at their institution. And it is a curated letter of various information and input from different faculty. We consider that, one letter of recommendation, even if there's, 5 faculty that put information in there, and that's, kind of considered one. Some get labeled as committee letters where there's a preamble about the student, and then uploaded is 3 individual letters that are from faculty that are sort of sent in and talk about the applicant as if they could be separate letters. And so we consider that, if it's 3 separate letters, that's not just counted as one. So it really depends on what your institution has as how they define a committee letter. But I do agree that it's really helpful to have those separate individuals with different interactions, rather than one curated letter. You get a lot more information, and this is really to your advantage to have more depth and different individuals talking about your strengths and giving a different perspective, because each of them are going to have different ways in which they know you.
Great, thank you all for that. I'm going to turn back to you, Dr. Lucero, and moving from the discussion about letters of recommendation, and ask you to share why the personal statement or the essay is so important to the admissions process.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad you caught me before I put another peanut M&M in my mouth. So yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the application, and that's because it is really where you get to tell your story and your why medicine. And so I think use that wisely. Think about, this is your moment to reflect on, why medicine, not just why medical school, right? Because we're just one part of the process, and there's, I sort of look at it as this continuum. And so really thinking about what I want to take away from the application when I look at one is, why is this person going into medicine? What is it that they want to do? What is their vision of what they will be as a physician? And it doesn't need to be, it's very specific, like they want to be an interventional cardiologist or they want to be an obstetric anesthesiologist. It really is sort of bigger picture of vision and why they want to do it. And then the other parts of the application help fill out how you've developed that through the work that you've done, the interactions you've had, the clinical experience, the research experience, your community work. So think about this statement and spend time looking at and reading it and rewriting it, and have others look at it. I think on the next slide, I have kind of some tips, if we can go to that next slide. Yeah, so things that you can start to talk about. There are individuals that have, had a road traveled, and it's important to talk about that and how that shaped your why medicine. There are individuals that have had privilege, but what they've done with that privilege to make other communities or groups or individuals make things better for them is an important thing too. So I think that's your opportunity to really give us that information and make it easy for us to sort of glean that from, you know, all that your application has and tell that story. It also is an area where if you've had some challenges early on, some struggles, you know, talk about how that, you know, there's your chance to sort of reflect on that. I think you really have to bring out your unique personal part of who you are. Some individuals when they review applications think, oh, the personal statement is not as important because it's very, you know, similar. I am one of those people that really value it, and there's many people that review the applications and really love to hear someone's personal story or their why medicine or their journey. Make it something about you. I think you don't want to make it formulaic. We know we've seen lots of, you know, formulaic ones, and that's a missed opportunity to give us a perspective of who you are and, you know, why medicine for you. And then it also helps as the interviewers for those places where the interviewers aren't blinded, they're able to have a jumping point to have a continued conversation a little more in depth based on what they see from that personal statement. And, you know, we don't have blinded interviews, so our faculty really appreciate being able to get a little more, you know, story from the application that they can then have a conversation. It may be about their research, or it may be about, you know, kind of your journey and discussing that. So I think that's where you really want to don't lose out on that opportunity to really give that information to us on your application.
Yeah, so it sounds like the letters of recommendation are give others the opportunity to talk about you, and this gives you the opportunity to talk about yourself. Anyone else want to say anything about the essay?
No, I want to definitely echo and endorse what Dr. Lucero said, but also comment on something I've seen in too many personal statements. And I don't know why this comes across this way. And it got to what Dr. Lucero is saying. You want to have your why in there. If you don't have the why I want to do medicine really clearly stated, then your personal statement, for example, in our admissions committee, I've seen people not get admitted because there wasn't enough of a why. So a lot of mistakes people make with the personal statement, and I see this from external advising. They'll say your personal statement sort of like just write what you did in sequence and how it impressed you. And so I see some personal statements. I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what others here have to say, but where someone will put, then I went and rotated in an obstetrics ward and I saw babies being born. And then I was an EMT in ambulance and I saw this. But they never quite say why they want to go into medicine. It seems to be a list of exposures, even how it might impress them, but the why is missing. So I think what Dr. Lucero said about the why is fundamentally important to include in your personal statement.
Yeah, I would add one more thing. I agree with that's a no-no, what Dr. Galuma just outlined about listing stuff. The thing about a personal statement is it's personal statement, meaning it better be personal. That means it's about you. And that to me could be the why, but it can also be just who you are, where you come from, what your life's been like. That's the personal part. So I think I see some are very sterile and they don't have anything about who you are. That's, I think, a missed opportunity, let's say.
I can only echo that. And what they have been referring to is what we call in our committee, the laundry list. I did this and this and this and this and this, and that's why I feel like I'm ready to go to medical school. And as the others have already mentioned, you've missed the point. It's not that I want to see what you've done because I'm already going to see that in your activities section. It's what you got out of it, or why was it meaningful for you, or how did that or how did that fit into your wanting to go to medical school, or even make you more enthusiastic about going into medical school. And the other thing that I would say, and it's almost kind of, I try to make light of it because it's a serious issue, and I think it's a mistake that people make, is please don't start your application about your sick grandparent. And I know that they were precious to you, but after reading, I'm probably going to read about 500, 600 applications this year. After reading about, a grandparent, it's just not special to me. It doesn't, this is your opportunity, as was already mentioned, for you to, stand out and tell us what's unique about you and why you want to go to medical school. And that doesn't do that. It doesn't get you there. There's nothing wrong with it. You can put it somewhere else later in your application, but it's almost a complete, like, oh, here goes another standard statement.
Danny, well, anyways, I'm just so, I would have loved to have had this kind of up close, information and advice when I was an undergraduate applying to graduate school or anything. This is really incredible information that I really, really know is very helpful for our audience. So we've discussed the required components of the main application, but when is the best time to get the application in? Dr. Teraguchi, can you provide a brief overview of the timeline for from submission of the application into AMCAS through the admissions offer period?
Sure. So it's really important to look at the timeline and deadlines and what those might be. And you can see and one thing that you'll see that June deadline, we see a lot of pre-health students, I got to get it in by June 1st. And that's totally fine. You don't want to be delayed there, but just know none of the information is transferred until June 30th. So I had a student ask me for recommendation there. I got to get it in June 1st, right? And so just knowing there's a period of time for you to work, get it in, and then it's transmitted to the medical school, generally at the end of the month. And so there's a common application, a standardization across the nation through the AMCAS. You can see the categories there: biographical information, coursework, MCAT, the work studies, and letter recommendation, personal statement. And I'll just add to my colleague what they said about personal statement. I often give it an anecdote a little bit for folks. And as you're putting, again, it's a story, right? And I remember talking to a student, they thought all this clinical stuff and meaning, and I was looking at their activities, and they had biked across the country, and they talked about being shy. And I said, why did you do that? Because if you bike across the country, you can't be shy because you have to ask people for help. You're staying at strangers' people's house. And I inquired about it, and she said, because I am shy, I needed to prove to myself I was ready for med school that I could overcome that challenge. I learned more about that story than all the other clinical experiences about their personality and readiness and maturity. So I think as you put these things together, I often tell people, give it to somebody else, and what story do they see when they put it together, right? Because there's a piece there, and like Lucero mentioned this too, if you have gaps, if there is something obvious, you need to cover it somewhere, whether it's in the recommendation letter, like, oh, I had a second career, now I'm going to community college to make all of my courses, or I had a second career. We want to understand, well, why did you make that decision? So if it's obvious in your application, you want to make sure you put it together and you have that time to do it there. And in that June period to November, right? So you definitely want to get it on time to be able to get it into the system. And then each of our medical schools have a secondary application. This is an opportunity for you to tailor your experiences to that school. Now, one thing, I'm sure my colleagues may agree with this, we do look for correlation between the AMCAS application and secondary. So if you're looking at the school and all of a sudden your secondaries you have these values that aren't reflected in the AMCAS, there's often a discorrelation there. So be true to yourself, look at our schools, make sure it's a good match for what you're interested in and a good fit. Really talk about, this is the place that I can achieve my goals. Here's what I've been doing underserved communities. I connect to the different clinical centers. I want to work with these different populations. It's a really good opportunity to do that. Many times there's also a place in the application that says, is there anything else you want to share or impact on different things? And oftentimes there's a lot of students will talk about, maybe I didn't get into medical school, or I didn't get as good as my MCAT and so forth. So I often look for ownership here, right? And while there's some external circumstances, it's really like, okay, I'm taking ownership of this. This is where I was. I could have done X, Y, and Z. This is how I've grown for it. I took the exam again. This is how what I did differently. See the growth. And we talked about the myth of being successful on one MCAT. We really do appreciate different people's life journeys and understanding that, but you have to help us understand that journey, right? You don't want the reader to make assumptions about your story. So the clearer you are about your story, the better. So you have two opportunities to do that with the primary and the secondary application, particularly to that particular medical school. And then interviews. You want to look at what type of interviews, whether it's a mini medical interview where you have a series of short interviews, usually 8 or so, with little scenarios and be able to respond to it. Traditional interviews as well. You also want to look at folks as whether they have rolling admission deadlines and when they come out. I know at UCSD School of Medicine, we really look to start making offers in November, end of the calendar year. So you really want to look when those decisions are. Some medical schools do wait to the very end and do all at once. And so you do have to look at when they have those opportunities. And then many of our schools also have different opportunities once you're given that offer, opportunities to learn about them in more different ways. Here at UCSD School of Medicine, we often call them first looks. They'll recruit you back. So you want to map out your timing that's there. And sometimes there's a little bit of myth that you get them in all early, you get in the first pool. And the mission committee processes do have a rubric where they look at your application across different areas. So if you're in a different pool, sometimes they're strong pools, sometimes they're not as strong. So it's really evening them out across the different things. So if you get your application in October 1, part of the medical school design is to look comparably across different pools of where you are. So there's a big myth that you have to get everything in June. And some folks, because they're working components, because of the deadline, we look at them equally thoroughly at each stage. Doesn't mean we look at them earlier better or later we kind of skim through them. So really pay attention to deadlines, but do not miss deadlines. That's the easiest way to be disqualified by not meeting those deadlines. So make sure you do them. Look at when MCATs have to be submitted. Different schools say you have to be submitted, you have to have your score in. So just really make sure you have those deadlines on a calendar and that you meet them.
Great. Thank you for that, Dr. Teraguchi. Before we open up the conversation for questions, I want to turn to Dr. Henderson to ask that he talk about the important role that mission-based programs have in providing support to students along the path to medical school. And so I'm sure he'll sort of zoom right through, but I just wanted before we ended for us to be able to share a lot of our special programs that we have throughout the UC system.
Thanks so much, Tina. I just want to just quickly qualify something that was said earlier about the grandparents. I think today, I'll just give an example. I interviewed someone who was raised by her grandmother from the age of 6. So that was very important to her, who she is. Again, I go back to the personal statement should be personal. So there are some exceptions, I think, to what Dr. Bardio said earlier, just a quick kind of point on that. I'd love to talk about the pathway programs. I think just briefly, because we want to get to the questions, the system, all of us on the call here are involved in a number of pathways that help you enter medical school. That is, their pre-medical pathways. And then we all are involved in pathways that help you feel a part of something once you're in medical school. Both of those sides of the equation, if you will, are important, especially when we think about some of the health disparities that us as a system are trying to address. So this pathway is just the usual pathway that's up there. There's, you go to college and you go to medical school, you go to residency. Some people do a fellowship. That's not for everyone, but this is the straight path. Next slide. I forget who's running the slides, but so there are many other paths. Let's put it that way. At a place like our place at UC Davis, I would say the vast majority of the people who enter our school who did not go in a straight path. Next slide. Here's a couple. These are some UC Davis programs. So we have about actually 6 different pathway programs once you enter the school. Each of them focuses on a community that's not been well served in California. I won't go through them all, but that's on the left-hand side of the slide. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see UC San Diego. There are also a number of programs, again, leading into medical school, again, that try to draw from the talents and assets of the community. The San Diego community, but beyond that, again, trying to have broad representation in medical school. The students that are pictured there, they're from our rural prime program, and that's those students all came from a rural community, and actually all of them have graduated now, and most of them are working in a rural community. Next slide. UCLA and UCI also again have a similar programs, again, both to support students to enter medical school or other health professions, and then to support them once they're in school, or let them focus on a community that they are either from, identify with, or want to continue to work with throughout their medical career. So these programs give you additional instruction, additional kind of peer support and faculty support to help your journey through medical school, which is hard once you get there. All of them, again, focus on a community of need in California. Next slide. I love this program, and I should probably let Dr. Chiraguchi talk about it because it's a really UCR thing, but this is a program, again, that allows students that are enrolled at UCR, UC Riverside undergraduate campus, to actually finish their undergraduate career early and gain what we call conditional acceptance into the UCR School of Medicine. So it allows some of the requirements to be skipped over in a sense if other requirements are met. Now, again, I don't even want to say anything, Danny, about it because I don't.
No, that was great. Good summary. It's really designed to really encourage some of our students with best message fit to commit to UCR School of Medicine because of their commitment to our mission. And our most sought out one is the early assurance program. And there's not a typo there. I just want to make sure you do not need to take the MCAT for that particular program. That's a big part of that. And what we do once they get in, because those standardized tests are a skill, we do, once they're admitted, provide testing. They get to take the MCAT to be able to do that, but low stakes, right? We want to form at a higher level, but it's not to get in med school. And so they have to meet that science GPA as well. And then the time of hire is designed for undergraduates to apply in to get into medical school. So we do favor our undergraduate school in this way to be able to do that. So thanks, Dr. Anderson, for allowing me to sort of highlight that.
No, of course. I think the nice thing about it, and again, these are mission-focused programs. So the mission of the University of California writ large is essentially to try to train physicians, or train physicians that reflect the broad communities that represent California, and also increase representation so that communities that are not being reached or not being served now have better health care in the future. And one way to do that is to, again, draw from each of our own communities and communities across the state. So these are all mission, that's why when you think about what your mission is as an applicant and try to understand what the mission of the schools you apply to are, that's one way to sort of think about whether you might fit there or whether you might want to apply to one of these programs that I just sort of raced through. And I apologize not be able to spend more time on each of them, but again, there's information all over the web, of the internet at each of our schools that tell you the details about each of these programs. Next slide. Yeah, these are what's called PRIME. PRIME means Program in Medical Education. This was an effort that was funded by the state, by the university, by where Dina works, the Office of the President. And again, the idea was to meet the health disparities that I just alluded to a minute ago. So every school has at least one or two PRIME programs. They're listed here on this slide. Like they focus on, I alluded to the rural health program, which is at UC Davis. Again, of course, it prioritizes students who come from rural communities and have connections to those communities and ultimately want to go back and serve such communities. The other ones listed on the slide, again, each are aimed at historically underserved community in California where we need to close healthcare gaps or disparities. I think, what do you think, Dina? Okay, keep going.
Yeah, keep on. We're at the end.
Oh, there you go. One more quickly. This is a pathway program that was called the California Medicine Scholars Program, which funds regional hubs. There are 4 in California. These are regions where we have connected together community colleges with 4-year institutions with medical schools. And so the idea is that we need to draw from the incredible talents of community colleges where a lot of people who can't maybe afford to go to four-year university or need to be close to home near their families, where they can still gain access to health professions. So that's a pretty cool program. Again, we have a post-baccalaureate consortium across the University of California that most of us participate in as well. So again, we're just trying to think about, if you will, the upstream path, allowing others who might not have access to health professions like medicine to get here. Sorry, I went too long there. 501.
Okay, there's lots of programs. So that's the point that I wanted you to share, is that, you know, these programs exist all over our campuses. And now we're gonna, you know, get to the good part, the questions and answers. So I see that there are many, many questions submitted into the Q&A. Thank you so much for such high engagement. I think, Jubin, are you gonna send me the first question?
Yes. I guess this is the same one. I think you guys all touched on it, but it's being asked again. It's about taking your prereqs at a community college, and is that going to be looked on differently than if you take it at a four-year school, or you're going to be looked up down? And I know you guys have covered it, but just wanted to ask it again because it was asked again.
Simple answer: no, you will not be looked differently. In fact, I want to add, it'd be interesting what others feel, but there are things we look for in students as well, and applicants. And one of the things is grit, resilience, perseverance. And I would say that those who are, this is a personal observation based on the students at our school who have gone through community college and then to four-year university and whatnot. I haven't done a scientific study on this, but I would say seem to have, there's something about them in terms of that grit factor, and because they really kept going, really put one foot in front of the other, and arrived at medical school. So in fact, I would say there's some favorability to that. I know it sounds odd to say that, but the short answer is no. Having courses at community college does not weigh you down in a negative way. At least at our school.
I would just add to that, community colleges are much more reflective and representative of the United States of America, okay, and California, and again, all of the individuals and people who live in our state that we need to, again, serve in healthcare. So in a way, they might even be better than some universities. I don't want to go too far on a limb. Okay. Jude, what do you think? So yeah, don't be afraid.
I just want to tell you, because like you guys talked about this at the beginning, and then we have like 7 more questions. So I just want to make sure we have everyone on the record. Dr. Barrios, Dr. Lucero, Ms. Chung, everyone is in agreement.
The only thing I would say is sometimes challenging is credit number, at least from a quarter semester to a quarter system, the technical aspect of thing, not the quality of the course. It's making sure everything's transferred, all those kind of things. I saw a lot of questions about AP and all that. So it's the credit counting, particularly when we're going from one system to the next, but the quality of the course themselves, not a concern at all. But the technical aspects of the counting, something for us who have prereqs sometimes can come into play. So make sure you're looking at the resources around transfer and credit counting. That can be a place that can be challenging for community college.
I'll just go on record, and I know, Jobin, I've done talks here, and I always get that question. It is not a disadvantage at all. For those of you who have heard my talk here before, I even talk about how I did my DIY post-bacc when I was applying to med school, and several of the classes that I took were in community colleges, and I went across Los Angeles taking chemistry and, biology, various ones, wherever I could get it so that I could do my prerequisites. So it is not a disadvantage. We look very favorably at whether you're community college transfer or whether you take the post-bacc, you're taking your prerequisite courses because, you didn't have them in college, or you're doing, you did other things and you needed to take those after you graduated. Not a disadvantage at all.
And Dr. Lucero went to an Ivy League medical school. Not that, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, but I will say I really wanted to go to UCSF and they didn't take me. So
And then but you came back and you were faculty there.
I did. Yeah, I did. I
Yeah,
eventually got there.
yes, and that's why the program that Mark had mentioned, the the California Medicine Scholars Program, is such a great new program because it actually, at least right now, there's 4 of our schools of medicine that actually have, official formal agreements with several community colleges in their region. It's a regional program. And so that just emphasizes too that, this is a real path to medical school, and so don't be ashamed of going to a community college and taking these courses at all. So I'm going to move to the next question.
Yeah, and I'm just going to put this in the chat as well, that we actually had a presentation a month ago, literally like a month
Great.
ago.
Yeah, we sure did.
So you could go and watch it and listen to it and find out. And I'm posting that page right now.
So the next question is, what would you consider as high quality extracurricular activities?
I think the only thing that like, maybe just, not that there's anything wrong with doing anything that is a passion for you, but I tend to appreciate activities that involve group interaction, because then that speaks towards your interpersonal skills and your ability to work with a team and your ability to interact with people. I find those a little more interesting to me, and not that there's anything wrong with activities that you do solo, but if you're just looking for, and again, just don't do it because you think that's what I want you to do. Do it because it's something that's of interest to you, and if you can describe why it's of interest to you, then that's perfectly fine. But like I said, just as an aside, maybe a group activity is more of interest to me that you might have done that than a solo activity.
I would add that, we talked about, for example, Dr. Henderson talked about making a personal statement about you. So I always advise people, some of the applicants that most excite an admissions committee have an archetype to them. They could be the healer archetype. These are people who love to roll up their sleeves and go take care of people. They could be the servant leader archetype. These are people who like to improve their college or go out in the community and do things in public health or other things. There's also the innovator archetype. These are creative people who love tech, and they may do research or they may just solve problems in an innovative way. Stay true to your values and stay true to activities that really interest you. And you'll find you might know what archetype you are. And some of them are combined archetypes. You may be a healer, an innovator, and so on and so forth. But I think if you pick activities that really you're passionate about, it'll resonate. And then it'll inform you. It'll inform your choice to go into medicine. It'll inform how you express that choice. And so I think a good extracurricular is in your eyes, actually, not in our eyes.
Great. One of the other questions is whether it says, is going to a CSU acceptable, or must I go to a UC?
Did you?
I want to take this.
Okay, go, Jennifer. Go.
We're putting Dr. Lucero on the spot again.
I went to a Cal State University Northridge. It's absolutely fabulous education, great teaching. I had a wonderful experience. It served me well, and it's served many of our students in medical school and beyond well. So no, it's not a disadvantage.
Yeah, we have like 5 CSU students in our first year class right now. It's just, yeah.
So, can we get someone to comment on the preview exam, and view is capitalized? Do any of you, are you all familiar with that exam, and can someone speak to that?
Mark, do you want to do that?
I wanted to let Dr. Lucero do that, but okay. So what preview exam is something that's it's what we call a situational judgment test, which is an online test, if you will, of a candidate's ability to reason through situations. So that's why, hence the term situational judgment. That's a more generic term. Casper is another brand, if you will, of situational judgment tests. Some of our schools are using that in the process, particularly UCLA and UC Davis, although how it's incorporated in the process is relative, at least, and I'll let Jennifer speak too, but at least in our process, it's limited. So we're sort of in the process of trying to figure out what it means. And so that's, I guess the answer I would say is we don't know exactly what it means, but it is being taken by a very large numbers of applicants across the country now. So, and it's definitely, it's required if you apply to UC Davis and I believe UCLA, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it is. It's required. And I think we're meeting together as a, talking about collaboration between the UCs. We're meeting to kind of see what we're looking more detail about it. And I think it is, I would agree, Mark, we're using it in a similar, limited view till we get more information about it. But it is more in a value added rather than, something that is going to be a line you have to cross or get. So I think it's something that we use it kind of at the end looking.
I like this next question. It says, what is the oldest candidate you have selected? And then it says, how old is old?
I always like to tell this story because I think it really gets at sort of what, it's not age, it's sort of why and what you do with your medicine, that sort of why medicine again. At my medical school, we had our dean of students, was phenomenal, amazing individual, and just recently retired a few years ago. She had she had done an entire career, raised a family, and helped, was raising the family while her husband went to medical school, became a physician. Her dream was always to go to medical school. And she ended up, I believe it was at the age of like 43 or 46, starting med school, because once her family was raised and she wanted to follow this dream, she worked in and started a HIV clinic at one of the most critical times of the crisis, and was one of the most thoughtful and amazing and impactful physicians and dean of student affairs. And I think, that to me it wasn't about an age or what, it was what was important in following her dream. And she had a huge impact, not just in her patients, but in the students that she worked with and mentored. And, I was just, in awe. And, I always mention this story when we talk about, what's too old. I think, that's relative, I think that you just have to think about why medicine and what's important and what you want to do with it.
I would second that. But I'm sure people are asking, I don't think you really can answer what is too old. I will say, for example, our current first year class, the oldest person there is 40. Last year, they were 36, the year before, 41. So it gives you a feel of the general age range of what we see. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you. So how can non-traditional applicants stand out? And how does your school measure the distance traveled for untraditional applicants who took growth years to work on their metrics?
Well, I would say it's all part of the holistic review we do. And one thing I should put out front is that non-traditional applicants bring something else to a class. So we love a wonderfully diverse class. People would say some non-traditional applicants bring an element of maturity. They also bring the wisdom that comes from their prior careers to the table. And so it just all depends, like a lot of things, who you are, what you've done, what your passions are, and why you want to go into medicine. One thing I do want to get out there is being a non-traditional is not a negative factor, because a lot of times they bring significant positives to the table.
Yeah, I would say there's no one way to measure distance traveled. That's as Dr. Galima said, it's really a it's a measure. It's not a measurement. It's like it's really holistic review of an application means you look at that application from multiple perspectives. And so there are different ways to travel a distance. Could be you're from Siskiyou County, and so you traveled to I don't know where because there's hardly any healthcare providers there, to get medical care, so distance travel, that's a metaphor, right?
Yeah.
So it really just depends on what you mean by that. And our schools try to really look again at the whole package, if you will. And I think it does, to the extent it reflects some type of resilience, grit, some of the qualities that were alluded to earlier. It's something we care about.
One of the other questions that came in asks about, they ask, what about being at an out-of-state college as a California resident? Would that put me at a disadvantage?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, as long as it is a legitimate accredited school, that myth that we only take California school applicants is not real.
Right. And so another question that came in asks, are there expirations to the science prerequisite versus English and humanities? I guess there's a time limit on whether your prerequisites count or not. I think that's what they're asking. Like, is there a cut?
I'm going to ask Callan. She's going to know. Go ahead.
I think it varies from school to school. We have a strong preference for prerequisite courses that are taken within 10 years of the year of matriculation, but this is not a hard and fast rule. And so I think in a lot of cases for applicants who've either done graduate work, post-baccalaureate work, or who are maintaining sort of a connection to science through work, either lab or professional or otherwise, I don't think they should necessarily be too concerned about that. But technically, yes, it's written. And if you look on the MSAR, if those of you who haven't already looked at it, it's a great resource, the medical school admissions requirement. It used to be called a handbook because it was a physical handbook, but it is now like an online resource. Will actually ask the question, and you can see for medical schools that you're applying to if any of them have a time limit requirement on your prerequisites.
And
you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry, Dina. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and do those exist also for non-prerequisite classes, or there is not any? I wouldn't think there would be, but I think that's what they're asking. No. Okay, go ahead, Kama. Sorry about that.
Oh, no. I just wanted to contextualize that answer. And there's a subtext to the question, and the subtext question, maybe reading between the lines too, is how far out from when I took classes can I apply to? That I will be honest with you, and some admissions committee, our admissions committee at least, looks at, boy, that person's been out of school so many years. They, things change, your life changes, some of the skills you acquired while in school, your methodologies atrophy a little bit. So that does bring a point of concern. Is it evidence-based? We do see it on the back end sometimes, but it will raise a query. So just to keep that in mind as well.
All right. Speaking of post-bacc, Helen, because you did mention that, someone asked which one is considered more valuable, a DIY post-bacc or a formal post-bacc program for an applicant that has a lower GPA?
So I think this is going to be very context and personal based on the applicant, right? We also realize that formal post-bacc programs have resources, and for some applicants that might be more beneficial for them, but those tend to cost more money. They require a time commitment. Often you have to stop working, they're full-time enrollment. And so if you do a DIY post-bacc program, I think that's fine. I think what is most important is you sort of address whatever reason you're taking that post-bacc for, and make sure that you're addressing those concerns in the post-bacc program that you're doing. So a DIY post-bacc could work fine for you, as long as, like I said, you're addressing those concerns. So as an example of that, sometimes I talk to applicants who say, oh, I got a C in this chemistry course and I want to retake this chemistry course because I got a C. Well, if you got a C in chemistry and then the very next quarter or semester you take that exact same course again, the likelihood is you're going to get an A. I would have an expectation that you're going to get an A. And by the way, when you take those courses and you submit those grades to the AMCAS, they're going to average out both of those things anyway. So what might be more helpful, as long as you feel like you have the foundation in that course that you took and you got a C, is for you to take an upper division course in a similar subject. That might also show that you understand the subject matter and show that you have an interest in that in a science. So I think that it kind of depends. I think the most important thing is that you're asking for advice from either pre-health advisors, or if you can get it from medical schools, just to make sure that you're crafting a program that is working for you in the context of your application and making you the most competitive applicant possible.
That's a great answer.
Add something too, because this comes up. You know, Dr. Chung's thing about why what you're addressing the post-bacc. If you're addressing an academic performance in undergrad that you thought wasn't your strongest, and you want to show that you can handle an academic load, because that's what it is. A lot of admissions committees, it's not so much they're looking for the A, they're just looking for a sign that you'll be okay in their school. So what we'd recommend you don't do is, because focus on the grade, for example. So I'm going to take one course 1 year and then get an A in it. Then next year I'll take another course, get an A in that. I think our admissions committee, at least, when you look at how they process things, we'd rather see all the courses somewhat close together that replicate sort of the academic rigor and load you might be taking in medical school, and just to make sure you're okay. So taking lower grades, but taking all the courses together might tell us a lot more than individual A's spread out over years. I just wanted to put that out there, at least at how our admissions committee thinks. You know.
Great. Going back to, I think, following up to the conversation about expiration of courses, there's a couple questions also that asked whether there was an expiration on letters of recommendation and on the MCAT.
I think most programs want you to take the MCAT within 3 years of your application. Again, but there might be variability. I'd always defer to Helen on this. She's smarter than this on me.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking that too. She probably has that off. I was gonna just add her, like, already the recommendation that she made was the MSAR. That's like the easiest way to get the details, and I think it varies. We've been a little bit more lenient because of COVID impacts. So, but you know, Helen, jump in. But the MSAR for me is like, I tell everybody, go to that MSAR. Like that's the place. It gets updated every single year. We have to update it, so it's up-to-date information.
Yes, look at the MSAR.
And looks like Jubin put a link to the MSAR in the chat for you. So thank you for adding that, Jubin. Someone asks, do international students who are now attending a UC qualify for UC medical schools?
I know we take international students. So, and there's, again, just to go to the MSAR, it's it will tell you specific things that you need to have, you know, to qualify to apply as an international student, but we definitely take international students.
I think the only caveat I would mention, in addition to what Dr. Lucero said, is that, you know, as an international student, and if you are one, you know this, you know, you can't qualify for federal financial aid in this country. So that makes it difficult sometimes from a financial perspective for such individuals. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't qualify to be admitted to a school.
Yeah, and it's all school specific. We, for example, don't take international students. So I would recommend you look at the eligibility criteria for each of our schools. Each of us are different, and just so you understand where to go with that.
Okay, one of the other questions is about what your view is on people going to nursing school first to get clinical experience and then applying to medical school. Like, is that a new trend, or what say you about people needing to go that route?
I know this was asked before. Sorry, so is that I was just going to say, I know when I was doing this session before last year, that question came up again. I don't. I think that the question will always be asked, why switch, right? So there has to be a reason for why you entered into nursing and now have decided to go to medical school. And I have worked with just phenomenal clinicians as my as part of my, they were faculty with me at my previous institution, just phenomenal. But their story was they were a nurse, worked as a nurse for years, and then decided later that their dream was always to go to medical school, and they entered medical school after having a long career as nursing. I think that's a different story than being a nurse, doing that for a few years with the goal of, going to medical school. Everybody's going to wonder why, why are you doing that now? So I don't think that's sort of a backdoor, if you will, to like gain admissions. You have to have a real, and it is it does a disservice, I think, to also we have a nursing shortage, and the goal is to train nursing programs, to train nurses that are going to go and be nurses for a considerable time, and we're at a critical point in nursing with the shortage. So I think you're not thinking about healthcare globally and providing healthcare and healthcare resources. That's not an effective way to do that.
Thank you. So Melanie, I think you had the next couple of questions.
Yes, we do have a question returning a little bit to the letters of recommendation. The question is, can the letter come from a freshman year professor or a later years preferred?
All comers, it's someone who actually knows you and can really express who you are as a person. So it's we don't make a differentiation. Like, I've never sorted out when I've reviewed a file whether it came from a freshman professor or not. I'm just looking for what they're saying.
And I just add, I think it's, again, what the people had said here before, reinforcing is what's the relationship with that particular person. If they were your freshman faculty and you kept in touch and engaged them, really the level, it doesn't matter. It's your relationship to them. And to me, it's about telling the story too. Like, so if, for example, we had the nursing question in there. Maybe you kept in touch with that faculty and they tell you this person's always wanted to go to med school, but they had to go to nursing school to make some funds. They want to be clinic. They want to help a community. We just had a medical student who had 10 years of nursing, and it was really to be in that field, really make a difference, get some stability in finances, had their family, and then they had to be ready for medical school. So having faculty talk about that journey, they kept in contact, see the person grow into that and explain that piece of it. So I do think it's just telling the story, understanding the pieces you have to put together and reinforce that story, and being, I think, very honest about what your story is. So if you feel like, gosh, I wonder why there's a gap. And I always think about what everybody is saying there, like, why now, regardless of what age you are, why now medical school, and explaining where that is and why that is. And the more your recommendation letters can explain that. And sometimes we put weight in that because it's somebody, not you, telling it, like they're reinforcing something that they are seeing about you as well. So it's that relationship that is key, regardless of when you met the faculty or what level they are as well.
Thank you for that answer. And now for like inclining towards non-traditional students, what things do you consider when the applicant to your school is a parent?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. What things do you consider when the applicant to your school is a parent?
Well, one thing we don't do is say, oh, they have a parent, they can't be a good medical student. That's not if they're so on one side of things, whether we look for deficit or anything like that, not at all. In fact, an applicant who's a parent, remember I talked about non-traditional applicants who bring wisdom and diversity. They bring a diversity of wisdom to the class. The applicant who's a parent is often someone who knows how another human being can be totally dependent on them. They know how to be there for someone. They know how to pay the bills. You know, they know how to be committed to someone and not fail. You know, and so a lot of people who are parents that bring in something special to a medical school class and to medicine going through that journey. So that's at least how I process an answer to that question.
So I'll take the next question. So as a current applicant, how heavily can letters of interest factor into a school extending an acceptance? Can and should we submit LOIs to UC schools we haven't interviewed at?
I think it's probably school dependent of the answer, but so it's letter of intent is not, it's not going to make a difference for admissions for UCLA, and I see others are shaking their head, and so I think, you know, we get a lot of those, but it's not going to matter. So, you know, you can save, at least for UCLA, I would say it's not necessary because it won't make a difference. And I think part of that goes to the idea of, you know, equity. Maybe some students don't know that, you know, oh, if we said, oh, if you send a letter of intent, that gives you an advantage. What about those students that are never told to do that? They get disadvantaged. We have to be fair about, you know, how we process it, and we look at the application as it stands at the time that they go through, and we're not adding any additional after. So we also don't, if you have an update to your application, it's not going to get reevaluated if the update, you know, if even if it's been updated prior to our review, we review to make it equitable, everything that's available at the time of the application submission. So I think that's, again, another aspect of it being equitable for everybody that goes through the process.
I would agree with that. I don't think it moves the needle. And I would even add to that the occasional mistake that's made of trying to send a letter of interest more than once, or try to follow up, or send multiple updates. It actually becomes counterproductive.
I would definitely echo that as well.
Another question is, how would having an academic integrity probation on your transcript affect your application?
I can be honest with you, it's a challenge. So when you look at an applicant, human beings make mistakes, right? And I think when the committee is assessing that, you're looking at human growth in 3 domains. One might be maturity. But so if you do something and it's an issue of maturity, that you can fix that. You can grow out of that. Other students and applicants make mistakes due to an issue of judgment. That is less fixable, but definitely can be informed. Your core ethical principles, where academic integrity starts to fall into play. A lot of us feel if you're not ethical when you're a freshman or sophomore, you're likely not going to be ethical ever, right? It's just your core makeup. And so it is a hard place to come behind. It doesn't mean you can never apply or even try and apply, because it's all why it happened, what you took out of it, and what you've learned from it and how you've grown out of it. You want to make sure that if you had an ally, a faculty member who's behind you, understood your growth, you address it head on. You definitely want to address it head on in a statement about it, even your personal statement, and have maybe a faculty member who you trust address it in their letter of recommendation if you've grown from that. But you know, when you look at least how our admissions committee thinks, your ethical structure, you don't really grow. It is who you are. You know, you learned that when you're 6 or 7 or 10. So it can be more of a challenge, to be honest with you.
I would agree with that. It depends on the situation, and we do believe in sometimes people make mistakes. Now, it can't be a heavily egregious problem, but you know, a lighter problem, and part of it also, as well as was just expressed, was, you know, did you express remorse? Did you express learning from it? Did you face it head on in your application and say, hey, I realized I made a mistake. That's what's in there, but I went through a probation period and I learned from it, and I had somebody who took me through it and mentored me, as opposed to the person who starts going, well, I really didn't know, and it kind of wasn't my fault, and, you know, it wasn't mine, which is, you know, very common. And you know, if you don't take ownership of it, that's actually going to be hurtful. But having something on there that you grew from, that it's not a fatal blow.
The next question is a great question about whether or not you expect the recent SCOTUS decision on affirmative action to have an impact on the incoming classes with respect to diversity.
Well, here in California, we don't really look at quotas anyways. We look at a holistic approach, and that's been our approach at UCI for quite some time. Plus, we have our mission-based programs where the holistic approach and this applicant's experience and intentions come into play. So I really actually don't see it having too much of an impact for us.
I would agree with that. We live under California Prop 209, which is in some ways more restrictive than the downstream effects of the SCOTUS decision, and so I don't see any substantive difference or impact based on that.
I would agree with you all on that. It's been a big, you know, question for many of us throughout the system, not just in medicine, but across all admissions at UC. And, you know, we are going to continue on as we have for the last 27 years in doing what we can to admit, you know, diverse classes. So I'm going to turn over to you, Matt, for the couple questions that you're going to ask.
Alrighty, thank you so much. So how do you guys view students who had to drop out from a previous school but kept going and went back to school to go to med school?
Circumstance, context, right? Because it depends on why. Could they not afford to go? Do they have to go take care of a sick family member? Did they join the Navy? I mean, there's various and sundry reasons why people don't have a traditional continuous pathway. And as was mentioned earlier, if you have something like that on your application, put it in there and mention it. And maybe, again, that's what your personal statement is for, is to help us figure that out. So again, not an automatic write-off.
Alrighty, for the next question, does getting an additional BS or MS or MPH look favorable for students who have taken gap years?
I was going to say, I think it depends on why you're doing that degree. I think just to take it, thinking it's going to improve your chances, that doesn't really impact it. Again, it goes to the sort of, you know, why medicine, right? So there's a story that you have to tell of why you did that. I did a master's before I went to medical school, but I was on a path to do a PhD in social psychology. And so for me, you know, then I you know, made a change, and in my personal statement, you know, I talked about that. But I didn't go to a master's program because I thought, this is going to help me get into med school. Now, did it help me with when I was in med school and the research that I was doing, and did it help me in the work that I do now? Absolutely. But I didn't do it because I thought this'll help me get into med school. So I wouldn't do that and incur the cost if you are thinking, you know, this'll help me get into med school. If you have a passion about public policy, public health, and you are looking at, do I want to, I might want to go to med school, but I think this is going to help me sort of understand and craft kind of what I want to do, and should I embark on medical school, I think I want to do this degree because this is knowledge I need to get to kind of make that decision, then sure, that makes sense and it's going to help you. But I wouldn't do it to say, oh, I think this is going to get me in, because that's, you want to be able to be committed to the work that you're doing in your master's program and dedicated to that. And it's not going to be fun to do that and incur that cost if you think it's just a checkbox to get into med school.
And I'd have to agree with Dr. Lucero there. I actually did the opposite. I was pre-med and I was looking to decide, like, what in medicine do I want to do? I knew that it was to focus on the underserved and those kinds of things. And I went to public health school first and ended up staying put and not going on to medical school after all, because I really felt like public health was truly why I thought I was going into medical school. But I was like, oh, it's public health and policy, and that's actually what I do. And I'm really glad that I made that decision. I still end up working in this space anyway, because obviously physician workforce shortages are a big part of why people don't have access to the full spectrum of healthcare in their communities. But it is the thing that doing that master's was critical in shaping my career path. And so, yeah, I agree fully with what Dr. Lucero said.
I want to add one thing, and it's something I've noticed. I'm curious if the other deans have noticed this too. There are some applicants where it's hard to explain why. It'd be too long to explain, where they're doing the master's, it's a backdoor post-baccalaureate. So they're trying to get their GPA up, and they're doing, I'll get a master's while I'm at it. Keep in mind, and I'll get back to very important things that Ms. Bullard said and Dr. Lucero said. You want to do a master's that really means a lot to you. So if you're doing a master's, it's easy coursework. I'll get my GPA up. We can see, we look at your transcript and we see the rigor of the courses in there. We understand what's going on. We know where the master's degree program is and what it's in. The other side of that coin is really doing the master's that you are passionate about. I remember once an applicant did a master's degree in gender studies, and she really leveraged that information. It was beautiful in how it informed her perspective on medicine. That's someone who got something really meaningful out of the master's, much like getting a master's in public health might give you something meaningful in that thing. So do a master's degree for the right reason, which is to augment your education, develop yourself, and find a lens through which you might want to apply medicine. Don't do it to buff up your GPA in a different way. I'll just put that out there.
One question that I saw that made me stop and go back to is that someone asked, they said they'd been told that speaking on stories of mental wellness or mental health struggles impacting grades being considered an automatic disqualification. Can someone speak to that?
Or I'll chime in first. So I think what they're getting at is, would a committee look at, this person had mental health issues and affected their grades? Remember, we only look at grades as a metric of how you might be able to be okay in our rigorous curriculum. In fact, if you had some mental health challenges and overcome them and learn from them, we actually know whenever someone has had some challenges like that, no matter what they are, they bring empathy to their work, right? So no, definitely will not be an automatic disqualification. And in fact, given what someone might learn from their mental health struggles, it might actually make them a better candidate for medical school, if not a better doctor downstream. The one caution I would have, our wellness directors bring that up, is you don't want to let your struggles, you want them to refine you, not define you. So, and that's always a quote I like to take forward. So think about how, if you've had mental health issues, how they refine you as a human being, refine you as a future doctor as you go forward in your application. And don't let them define you. I think you'll be actually very successful applicant.
Yeah, I would also go even further and say we're not supposed to automatically disqualify you if you have a medical condition, as long as you are capable of performing the activity for which you are applying. But I would also agree that if you continue to struggle and you continue to almost even say, well, this is going to keep me from being my best, you might want to relook at what you're doing, but again, it's not going to automatically disqualify you, as Dr. Lima was saying. If it made you a better person for your struggles and gave you more insight and awareness and maybe empathy towards future patients, or that's guiding you into a career in psychiatry, if that's what you want. I mean, so that was a long version of no, it's not going to disqualify you.
The only thing I'll add is not really specific this question, but some of the question, I don't know if this is where some of the participants are getting from. Be careful where you're comparing information from these websites and other experiences. Say, hey, you need to do this and that. So be very careful about comparative. You don't know, say, hey, I got this or I didn't get in. So be very careful evidence-based practices in terms of what is actually truth, because that's where a lot of information comes from. And we know it's natural for people to compare, hey, I read on this website, X, Y, and Z, don't do this and that. And you'll hear us, you've heard us over and over, individualized, personalized, what is your story? Explain it. It's not going to be the same as somebody else. There's many different pathways. So be very careful where you're getting sources of information. Hey, you need to get a master's degree, and this is the way you get into med school. Or, hey, you need to do this, or don't do this, don't do that. So be very careful of your sources. Certainly see your pre-health advisor for some of those sources. Look at MSAR resources that have been vetted and looked across. So be very careful of your resources where you're getting answers for that. So just be very aware that our medical students do it as well. I think we do it naturally to compare information. So be just aware when somebody says something, you don't know their history, their story, what that meant in the context. So just be very careful of your sources of where you're getting information.
And I'll just add, that's why we're here today answering these questions, because we are the best source rather than, secondary, third sources.
Yeah, and that's the only thing I would add is don't listen to your friends, don't listen to posts on TikTok. None of those folks have done it or know much about it. These folks are the experts. That's why this platform has been created. And I think like some of these folks have been here multiple times to the point that they've like blocked my email address. Just kidding. But they've been here multiple times, and like, they're here because they want to be here, and like, and they're here to answer those types of questions. So, and there's this thing in psychology you should read about. It's called zero-sum bias, and don't buy into it. So, whatever you do for your own mental health and well-being, like, don't get there and listen to people that, or keyboard warriors. That's what I call them, to people that post stuff all the time. They don't know what they're talking about, and that's just, because I could tell you the experts that are here, they don't go and post stuff on the internet. And so the people that are posting are the people that have too much time on their hand to post things.
Yeah, I would also add to that if what you're reading out there sounds a little too absolute and a little too off the mark, go ask. And I hate to say it because people get access to my email and my phone as well, but ask an expert and say, is this really right? Like go, which is part of what I tell students and potential applicants anyways, is like, ask questions, but ask just exactly what Jubin just said, is of the correct people, not the anecdotal things you're going to get from some random website or TikTok.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. We're coming toward the end, but we still have time for a few more questions, so I'm just going to keep them coming. So how is online coursework viewed by the admissions committee, specifically for prerequisites, labs during COVID, those kinds of things? Can someone speak to that?
And I tell you something, our medical students learned some stuff online when they're during the COVID pandemic. It's online. It's still good content. It's you're learning. You know, it's coursework. So that'll be my 2 cents in the equation here. Too.
Okay. The next question is, for those who may not pass the initial computer metrics filter for secondaries, can you share what the manual review process is like at your school?
Wait, did you say for those that didn't pass the first metric?
Yeah, who didn't pass the computerized scoring, I guess, through AMCAS to get secondaries. Yeah, it says for those who may not pass the initial computer metrics filter for secondaries, can you share what the manual review process is like at your school?
I'm happy to share a little bit about this. I think that, you know, if people sort with different thresholds and they don't make the threshold, I assume that's what they're asking. How do you go back and pull to do that? At least at UCR School of Medicine, and we don't set thresholds, but you got to narrow down the pool in some way. So there are different ways to do that. And we often have this philosophy, there's always a diamond in the rough. It has a unique story where, like we said before, the numbers don't always tell the stories, right? There's a reason behind those stories, elements that we missed, and be able to go back. So we do go into different pools that have been sorted in different ways to look at our mission fit categories, to understand those stories, what they might be, and to have those interviews. So at least for our process, there's when you're processing thousands of applications, you need sort of system to get to a reasonable amount to look at. But also, we know those metrics. I know AI is a big thing. How does AI kind of capture all these things? I'm a belief that maybe I'm old school here as I get older. Humans have a better way of looking at those stories and contextual understanding what those are and be able to pull those back out. I think Dr. Henderson mentioned conditional admits, right? Those are areas where you might look, you have a very mission fit, they may need some work where we ask them to roll in a post-bacc to be able to develop those different areas. So at least that each goes a little bit different, but we do allow those kind of fine diamond in the roughs in different ways to be able to do that. And I'm sure my colleagues have different ways where they look at those opportunities for mission fit candidates where the algorithms of certain ways may not capture all those good applicants with that journey.
I think just to add to that, when I talked about metrics of worth and metrics of risk, we go to, we all have to kind of narrow down who we look at because we do use human beings looking at things, and we go deep. Any deeper, and it's almost assured that someone's going to have some difficulty in our rigorous academic curriculum, and at some point we have to do someone a service. And so starting deep to begin with, and then looking at distance travel, being holistic, looking at different pools and querying yourself is definitely how we approach that. We are thinking about the concept of AI to go even deeper. We call it using AI restoratively, but that's still very conceptual and has to be taken very carefully. Because I'm with Dr. Haraguchi here, I think a human being looking at someone's story, the whole story is by far the best. With biases, no doubt accounted for. We understand human beings are biased, but I think if the people doing experienced reviewers, committee members who understand about bias and have experience evaluating files, we mitigate against that.
All right, so I'll ask one other question here. Oh, this is a great question. So how do each of your schools have mental health and wellness services for your students available?
Yeah, I can jump in here. We have a very robust behavioral wellness center that we added to in 2020 and resourced more providers. We also have dedicated student affairs members that have different wellness activities. And then within the different tracks, so, we have the PreMed track, for example, there's different wellness for those groups as well. So we've kind of had sort of built in, and then with our new curriculum, we have the base camp, and so built into base camp as that sort of transition into medical school. We kind of describe it the base camp because it's this ascent that you're going through at the beginning. There is built-in activities for wellness, and I have been very impressed with the Behavioral Wellness Center and the attention that they have to the students and the resources that they provide. So yeah, I feel like that's one of the strengths.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Guma.
Oh, no, I was just saying, as part of the University of California, where most of us are from, you have access to undergrad services as well. Same here at UCSD. We have a dedicated director of wellness programs in our department, in our school, who has open office hours, meeting with students. We have a wellness coordinator. We also are branching to new domains of wellness too, including peer support. So we have students find it's just another domain of support there's good evidence behind it. So our students provide peer support to our students. And the other domain we have brought online is personalized coaching, because part of wellness is kind of building up resilience and emotional intelligence and being able to take on the challenges that come with life as well. So we're proud of that as well. Sorry, Dr. Teraguchi, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. We're both excited to talk about and building a little bit with you had mentioned, Dr. Guma, about building resilience. Because what we often think about, I often think of as students, there are going to be environments that you can't control and be stressful that you're going to have to navigate in different ways. The world is not utopian. So even though we try to make it a rich culture of wellness, so I often tell students as they're going over this skill, we're going to struggle. All of us do that. When we're at the very bottom of that, we know what to do because you're in a dark place. You know what to engage and what research typically. As you go over that hill, when you recognize you're going over that hill, what are the interventions, coping mechanisms to allow you to move and thrive in that peace or adjust? The other thing that I think many of our schools do is help them become physician leaders, be a change agent in that environment to create systematic changes and be able to speak up, empower different folks. I think one of my colleagues mentioned servant leadership, right? Building a culture, and even if it's not you suffering, say, okay, the system put people at risk here. How do we fix that system so it doesn't happen again? So really being those change agents across different pieces. We want to really build healthcare in our communities and make better systems, not only for our patients, but also our healthcare providers.
Excellent. To wrap up this incredible conversation today, I want to ask each of the panelists, what departing message or insight would you like to share with the aspiring medical students in our audience? Anyone can go first.
I will boil it down to two things. And it was kind of alluded to earlier is have grit, be persistent. Persistence is a great personal character, personality trait. And ask a lot of questions. If there was one thing, people always ask me in my position, well, what would you do differently? And I was like, I would ask more questions. I would go so far as I would ask questions until I annoyed somebody, as long as I was getting the answers that I needed, because it would have made things smoother, and it would have helped focus my energy and my efforts as well as maybe not have to my story is a little bit non-traditional too, and so it would have been a little bit easier. So those are my two parting shots.
Thank you.
I'm a little bit biased. My research is on storytelling, so to me, it's like find your story and articulate that story and let it take you where you are passionately. And if you become a nurse, a social worker, a teacher, but find your story and be able to articulate that story. Whether it's Dr. Barris's question technique, but certainly tell your story and who you are and be true to that and be authentic in that space. And do not try to tailor it something else, but find that story and tell it well.
What about you, Helen?
I was going to say basically something very similar to what Dr. Teraguchi said, which is everyone has a narrative. Make sure that you tell your narrative and your journey in your application. But he already said it, so I'll just add to make sure that you provide the context for yourself and why you did the things that you did and your experiences and everything that sort of frames it. It's context is really important in the application. You can ask questions, which is great. And I absolutely think you should ask questions and get help and do all of those things. But the answer that that person gives you is only going to be helpful if it's within the context of your own experience and your journey.
Dr. Lucero.
I was trying to think of something that I would add. I do want to just say that I took a very circuitous road to get to where I am today and to do the work that I do clinically, which is very important to me. And of course, the work that I do being here today with you all. And so I think the journey is important. Sometimes we get fixated on sort of time and I have to get this done, or I have to, I'm too old to do this, or I should have done this. And I'm someone who did 2 residencies, and yet when I started med school, I thought, oh, I'm non-traditional. I need to go straight through. And I think the experience and what I've gained and the work that I've done, I could have given myself a little bit of slack early on and not, worried about that so much. But it's an incredible job that I do and career that I have. And I think it's very rewarding and fulfilling. And you all wouldn't be here today on a Friday night until 6 o'clock if you didn't think that it was that. And we have a very important responsibility to our communities. And think about that as you take this journey. And I think everything everybody said about your story and your journey, but also sort of look at it in context of kind of why you're doing this, and know that it's really I think don't get overwhelmed by it seems like a lot, but it's worth it because it's such a phenomenal I was just clinical yesterday, and I always walk away thinking I'm very fortunate that I get to do what I do, and I can't believe I get to do this, so just sometimes you need that motivator when you're thinking, how am I ever going to get through this? It's just know that it's an incredible what you get to do, and how we take care of patients and the communities we're going to serve is well worth it.
And Dr. Galuma.
I know it's an interesting transition. I have to confess to you, as I've, become a faculty member, a full professor, and a dean, and is when people ask me, so who inspires you? And what I found that actually the people that inspire me the most, day in, day out, year after year, are the students. They really do. And there's students like the future students like you who are listening. Why they inspire me? Because when you look back, you look at how far people have come. So some of you, I know what you're feeling. You're probably like climbing up a mountain in a blizzard where you're walking uphill. You can't see you're not sure where you're going to put your foot. You're just not sure. You can't see. It seems like you'll never get to the top. And I've seen people like you again and again. I've seen you get into med school. I've seen you graduate from med school and become residents. I've seen you become faculty. I've been around long enough to see that. And you are the people, when you come in at orientation, are the ones who inspire me. So just want to, my parting word would be, don't worry, just one foot in front of the other. You'll know be okay. The fact you're here means you're already doing the right things. The fact you actually keep that, the fact you're here today is you're doing the right things. Keep one foot in front of the other. It'll be okay. And you will soon inspire someone like me, if not me myself. I look forward to seeing you one day at orientation.
Well, thank you so much for those wonderful reflections as we close out our conversation tonight. I thank every one of you for joining us tonight. Thank you so much to PreMed CC for having this big platform that reaches so many different kinds of students all over the country. I'm just going to turn it back over to you, Jubin, for anything else before we sign off.
Oh, I don't think I could add anything intelligent or better. So thanks everyone for coming. We put the link for where the quiz and the PowerPoint's going to be posted, and our YouTube channel is going to be posted probably in a day or two. And thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see you on the flip side.
Thank you. Good night.
And thank you again, everyone, for coming. Dr. Galuma, Dr. Barrios, Ms. Chong, Dr. Lucero. I'm sure you guys are tired of seeing me. So thank you.
Thank you. This was great.